Hi, Alan Cox here. Hey, so in part one of our series on privilege identity management, we just talked about kind of some overview and kind of laid the groundwork. We talked a little bit about eligible roles versus active roles, um, and elevation, and all of these fundamental things that we have to kind of get out of the way and have a little bit of an understanding. In this video, we're going to talk specifically about, we're going to demo the setting up a role to be eligible versus active, and some of the settings in there. We're going to take our global administrator as an example, and we're going to walk through the configuration of how we would set that role up to make it essentially more PIM compliant, or privileged identity management kind of ready, if you will. So that's going to be our focus today. We're going to do a live demo of the some of the basic fundamental configurations that we need to do around a specific role. That's going to be our focus. So let's get started. All right, here we are back in entra.microsoft.com. And remember, we can go there, or we can go to the old portal access, but I like to go in through entra.microsoft.com. It does take some getting used to, as things are laid out a little bit differently. And so we're going to go there, and then we're going to go down to ID governance. You can then star that. Anything in here, you can star and make it a favorite, and then it shows up here, makes it that much easier to get to. So you go to privileged identity management. Remember, we talked a little bit about this. We talked about manage access here, and we talked about just in time, and we'll talk about all of this in a bit. And so here we can look at, if I'm looking at myself, I can look at my roles. I can see what roles I have as a anything that's eligible to me. And remember, eligibility means that I could just promote to that. So I'm eligible for that role. I don't have any eligible roles at the moment. Any active roles. So these are roles that I currently have active. These are direct assigned. These are active at the moment. Um, and so and so that, and this can actually change a little bit. We can see this, deactivate over here, but in any case, and anything that I've had that is expired. So we'll see that we can put a time frame on an eligible role or an active role. We'll see that here in a little bit. So all right, so my roles, so we're looking at that. Any requests I have, review access, approval requests, all of that stuff. We'll take a look at that later. And then we talked about Microsoft Entra roles. Okay, so let's take a look at this, and I'm going to go into the roles, and here we've got roles and assignments. If I click assignments here, I can see any eligible assignments. I can look at active assignments. These are all active assignments that are in my environment, which is really nice to see. We looked at it a little bit different in our last video, but we can see this here at a single click. I can see any assignments here that are active, as well as any eligible assignments. I do not have any eligible assignments. We'll take a look at this. We'll take a look at alerts and all of the rest of this later. Let's take a look at roles, and let's go into and let's do it. Let's just do an easy one here. So let's go into Global Administrator, because that is one you definitely want to make sure that you have protection around. So we're going to go into Global Administrator. And I'm just going to go in, and if I can find it, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. Global Administrator. So here I can look at any, well, first of all, I can look at assignments, and I can look at eligible assignments. There's nobody eligible for this right now, so nobody can promote into it. However, I do have some folks that are already actively assigned this role permanently. So they're just a global admin. And that's me and a Glassbreak account and another admin account. Nothing's expired here. So first thing we need to do really is we need to determine before we go in and add different types of assignments, we want to see what our settings are going to look like. And so we can look at role settings here or we can go here, either way. Now, what this is going to tell us and what this is going to do, and by the way, you can have different settings for different roles, and you might likely would. So for example, I can go into role settings, and this is really where we need to start. Um, and this is, and we're going to walk through this real quick because these are all the same no matter what role that we pick. It's just that different roles you might have different settings. So for example, the activation maximum hours is 8 hours on this global administrator. I may want to change that for a different role, or I may want to minimize that for this role. And uh, so we go up here and we hit this edit button, and we're just going to walk through this form basically. So essentially, I can say on activation, how long do I want the duration to be? So when someone elevates to this role, how long do I want that elevation, that them to be active in that role? So for example, and by the way, this is a maximum of 24 hours. Okay. You cannot have an activation longer than 24 hours. And really, you probably wouldn't want it to be. You want them to be, again, least privilege and just in time access, right? So I'm going to say here for a global administrator, I'm probably going to do maybe 4 hours. Okay. So we're going to say 4 hours. Okay. I want on activation, I want to require an MFA. So I want MFA requirement when a user is activation. Okay, we'll look at all of that here shortly. We can do a conditional access authentication context. There is a pretty tight integration between conditional access now and privileged identity management, which is really nice. It's actually built right into it. I don't know that we'll get there, but we can take a look at that. There's an article here you can jump out and take a look at. So on activation, we want to require a justification. Okay, we want this activation to require some level of justification. And we can require a ticket for activation as well. Now, require a ticket on activation could be an integration with something like a ServiceNow, where there's some tracking system along with that. We're not going to do that, but we can also go in and say we want to require an approval for activation. Okay. And we're going to set our approvers, and I'm just going to put myself down here. Now, I would recommend that you have more than one approver, because if someone's out and they can't get approved for a critical role like a global administrator or something that you may have an approval workflow, then they're just not going to get approved. And it's not going to happen for them. So I would definitely have multiple approvers in this case. Okay, so we'll move on here. Next is we're going to go to assignments. Okay, so we basically said, okay, when this role is activated, it's going to be 4 hours at a time. There is required an MFA. It's going to require justification. So the person activating has to type in this is why they need the role for that period of time, and require approval to activate. So next we're going to do an assignment. And here's where we can allow permanent eligible assignments. Okay, so permanent eligible, remember I talked about that in this article. In this article, we talked about the time-bound eligible, a role assignment where a user is eligible for the role only start and end date. So that's the eligibility period where they're eligible, not the amount of time they have the role, but how long they're eligible for that role. That's what this is. Allow permanent eligible assignment. And I'm going to say yes, but if I said no, I could say when someone's eligible, they're only eligible for 6 months, 3 months, 15 days, 1 year. I generally will allow permanent eligible assignment. That's okay. It's all up to your organization, but know that this setting is here. Okay. Then we have allow permanent active assignment. Okay. Now, depending on the role, you may not want this. For a global administrator, I don't know if I want um, allow permanent active assignment. But in any case, we're going to do that. But we're going to allow it. Because I do have active assignments here. But we can allow an active assignment for a given period of time. So even if someone's directly assigned a role active, not just eligible, then they can, we can still limit the amount of time that activation is valid for. So, but we're going to allow permanent activation, but also we can require multi-factor on any permanent assignment. So anytime someone's, and Microsoft's kind of forcing this a lot anyway on elevated roles. So in any case, I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to say allow permanent assignment. That's fine, and require justification on active assignment. So when someone is given the role actively, not just eligible, but actively, then they're going to require justification on that. Notifications, it can get a bit chatty. So you just want to look through this and say when the role is assigned, send an alert, notification to the assigned or the assignee, the user that's actually being assigned the role, and request to approve a role assignment. So there's just it gets a little bit chatty, and we might I would monitor a little bit of this of what works well for you. Send notifications when eligible members activate the role. Notification activated, through the requester, etc. I'm going to leave this as the default because we'll see some of the conversation that happens and see some of the notifications that do happen here. So that is that. And so at this point, we can update. So, and we'll just click update and that just saves it. So essentially what we've done here is we've said on activation, we're only allowing 4 hours at a time when it's activated from an eligible role. It's going to require an MFA. It's going to require approval, and it's going to require justification on that activation, and then of course the assignment, and then the notifications here. And we are going to update. And again, that has to be set for any role that we have. So that if we were to go into, let's just say authentication administrator and go into role settings, we're going to see that none of this is set. That's kind of maybe default settings here, but we've not set any of those on that assignment there. All right. In any case, that is what we have for the global administrator role that we have set up. And so up next, we will go through the process of actually assigning eligibility to a user, and then going through that entire process for that user. And so that'll be on tap. So stick around. I hope this has been helpful for you. Thanks for watching.